My husband left me for his boss, in the same office where I caught them laughing behind closed doors. He thought he upgraded, but what he didn't know, that very company was mine to begin with. And now, I'm taking everything back, including my dignity. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved one. It all started with small things. At first, I didn't even notice them. My husband, Ryan, had started dressing differently, sharper, like he was always trying to impress someone. He was checking his phone more often, smiling at texts he wouldn't let me see. He said work was getting busy, that he was aiming for a promotion, but something didn't sit right. We both worked in the same building on different floors, so I knew the pace of things. There were no promotions happening. He became distant at home. He was polite but cold, like he was there but not really with me. We used to laugh together, cook late-night dinners, talk about dreams. Now he came home tired, distracted, barely looking at me. I asked if something was wrong, and he said I was overthinking. One afternoon, I was walking past the floor his department was on. I didn't mean to spy. I just wanted to see him. Maybe give him a coffee and talk like old times. But when I got to the hallway, I saw them. Ryan and his manager, Olivia. They were standing close together, laughing at something, looking too comfortable. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then I started noticing more. He began working late. He'd tell me he had reports, meetings, tight deadlines. But every time I passed their floor, I saw the same thing. Him and Olivia talking, laughing, always too close. It wasn't normal. I started staying behind too, just watching from a distance. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed to be sure. One evening, after most people had left, I saw them again. The office was dim, quiet, almost empty. I stood behind the frosted glass, barely breathing. Ryan reached out and held her hand. Not for work. Not as a friendly gesture. It was soft, slow, like a silent promise. And she didn't pull away. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned around and walked back to my floor, my heart heavy. That moment changed everything. Something deep inside me broke. But at the same time, something else woke up. He thought I was weak. He thought I wouldn't see. But I did. And I wasn't going to sit back and let them play me like a fool. The night it all became real. I hadn't planned to follow him. But something in my chest told me I had to. Ryan had told me he was going out for a business dinner, something important with senior manager. He didn't offer details, didn't invite me like he used to. Just a quick goodbye, a smooth lie, and he was out the door wearing his favorite cologne. I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed from a distance. He didn't notice. He never looked back. His car took a few turns through the city, finally pulling up at a place that made my stomach twist, a 5-star hotel. Not a restaurant, not a conference center, a hotel. I parked far enough to stay hidden, but close enough to see clearly. He stepped out of the car and straightened his jacket, checking his reflection in the glass. He looked nervous. Excited, even. A few moments later, Olivia arrived. She got out of a sleek black car, dressed in something that was far from business casual. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she walked straight toward him. They didn't waste time. No awkward greetings. No distance. He kissed her cheek slowly, then her lips. They stood there, touching like no one could see. Like they hadn't destroyed something already. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. In that moment, it was like I wasn't real. Like I was watching someone else's life break apart. I stayed inside my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. My heart was screaming, but my face stayed frozen. My entire world had flipped without making a sound. They went inside together. I sat there for a long time, staring at the hotel entrance, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down I knew. The way they touched, the way they looked at each other, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fling. It was deliberate, careful, planned. That's when something shifted in me. I could have confronted him right then. I could have stormed into the hotel and made a scene. But what would that do? Let him lie again? Let her smile like she'd won? No, I wasn't going to be that woman. I drove home quietly, my mind racing faster than the traffic lights. I knew I needed to think smart, not emotional. If they were reckless enough to meet in public, then they were probably hiding other things too. And I was going to find out what. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about deception, disrespect, and a level of cruelty I didn't think Ryan was capable of. But now that I'd seen it with my own eyes, I knew he had chosen this. And so had she. They weren't just sneaking around. They were building something on the side while pretending I didn't matter. That's what cut the deepest. The lies, the arrogance, the smugness of it all. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even text him that night. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and gave it a name I knew they'd never see coming. This wasn't the end. It was the start. Walking back into the office after everything I'd seen wasn't easy. I felt hollow, like I was wearing a mask over a storm. But I smiled at the front desk, greeted coworkers, and played my part. No one could suspect a thing, especially not Ryan or Olivia. They had no idea I knew. That was my advantage. I kept my routine exactly the same. Came in on time, attended meetings, kept conversations light. But underneath it all, I was watching, listening. Every movement they made, every glance they shared, I noticed everything. They thought they were being clever. They weren't. Since Ryan and I were still technically together, we shared some access. Emails, schedules, shared folders for work. Nothing stood out at first. But one night, after staying late under the excuse of finishing reports, I started going deeper. I combed through old emails, personal and professional, searching for anything that confirmed what I suspected. What I found was worse than I imagined. There were threads between them going back months. They used coded language at first, pretending to talk about work tasks. But eventually they got careless. The messages became more obvious and more cruel. They talked about me like I was nothing. Olivia called me boring and too quiet to matter. Ryan joked about how I was just holding a desk and how it'd be easier if she left on her own. They laughed at my clothes, my habits, my ideas in meetings. They even mocked how I brought lunch from home, calling it sad little leftover. I wasn't just hurt, I was disgusted. They had plans, real ones. Ryan had suggested they move in together, saying he was done pretending. Olivia mentioned pushing for a promotion for him soon. But the part that made my blood run cold? They had been trying to get me transferred, demoted even. There were emails where Olivia proposed giving me a lower profile role, something that would make me feel like quitting. If we can nudge her out without HR getting involved, it's a win. That's when I realized this wasn't just personal betrayal. It was calculated. They wanted me gone, silently, without drama. Just erased. I knew then that silence wouldn't protect me, but it could be used as a weapon if I played it right. Digging deeper, I found a shared document in the company's internal system. It was buried under finance folders, something I wouldn't normally access. But the title caught my eye. It was a budget projection linked to a recent client proposal. Except, something was off. Numbers had been changed. Names were mismatched. When I compared it to the original version on my backup drive, it was clear someone had tampered with the file. And it wasn't just any file. It was one tied to a major contract with an international partner. A file that required board approval. If something went wrong with it, the consequences could be huge. I saved everything, every email, every document, every version. I wasn't ready to strike yet, but now I had more than heartbreak. I had proof, and that made me dangerous. Long before I ever walked into that office building as an employee, I knew it inside and out. Not because I worked there, but because it was practically built in front of me, brick by brick, floor by floor, through the stories my grandfather told me growing up. My grandfather was the kind of man who believed in hard work, loyalty, and building something that would last. He started the company with nothing but a dream and a tiny rented office. While others chased shortcuts, he worked late into the night, slept on his desk, and treated every employee like family. His name might not be on the sign outside, but every decision made in the early years had his fingerprints all over it. When I was little, I'd visit him at work. He'd let me sit in meetings, hand me paper clips to play with, and show me the ledgers like they were secret maps. I didn't understand them back then, but I knew they were important. He used to say, "This company will be yours someday, but you'll need to earn it. And when the time comes, don't let anyone take from you what you didn't hand over." I never really thought that day would come like this. Before he passed, he made arrangements to keep my name out of public ownership record. He didn't want me dragged into corporate politics too early. He believed I should be able to live freely, grow, and find my own footing before stepping into power. So the shares were placed in a family trust, quiet and secure. No one in the company knew. Not even Ryan. To the world, I was just another employee. But I wasn't. I held the majority. Quietly. Legally. Permanently. I never planned to use that power. At least not until I was ready. I wanted to learn from the inside, understand the culture, the people, the system. My grandfather had warned me. One day the wolves will circle. You'll need to know who's really with you, and who just wants your name. Now I understood what he meant. Ryan and Olivia thought they were clever. That I was just some background character in their story. But they never asked why I didn't fight for promotions. Why I never seemed scared of losing my job. Why I walked through the building like I already belonged. Because I did. And now that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, I was done pretending. I wasn't just some woman stuck in a toxic marriage. I was the one holding the keys they didn't even know existed. I went home that night and opened the sealed documents. The trust, the ownership papers, the rights I had over executive decisions, voting powers, board access. All of it. I stared at my grandfather's signature for a long time. He had prepared me for
Knowing
this.
who I was gave me
And
strength.
now, it was time
But
to make
strength
them
alone
regret
wasn't
underestimating me.
I needed facts.
They would never see
proof
me
that
coming.
couldn't
be twisted or denied. I already had the emails and documents they carelessly left behind, but if I was going to dismantle everything they built on lies, I needed more. Real evidence. The kind they wouldn't see coming until it was too late. So I reached out to someone who specialized in the truth. Someone with no ties to the company, no loyalties, and no reason to protect anyone but me. His name was Caleb. He didn't ask too many questions. He just nodded, took notes, and said, "I'll find what you're looking for." It didn't take him long. Olivia's record was much darker than her sharp suits and polished words suggested. On paper, she looked like a rising star. Fast promotions, glowing performance reviews, spotless credentials. But Caleb dug deeper. Beneath the surface, there was a pattern. At 2 of her former jobs, she had relationships with men who worked on. Both were quiet departures, swept under the rug with mutual agreements and confidentiality clauses. One even involved a married executive who was fired months after she got promoted. Nothing ever reached the press, but the stories were there, buried in resignation letters and quietly deleted email accounts. What shook me more was how calculated she'd always been. She didn't seduce for love, she seduced for leverage, influence, position. Every step in her career lined up suspiciously close to the downfall of someone else. It wasn't a string of coincidences. It was a strategy. Then Caleb turned to Ryan. I thought I was prepared for whatever he'd uncover, but the truth hit harder than expected. There were transfers, small amounts at first, easy to miss. But they added up. Money moving from one project to another, all linked back to internal accounts that had my name attached. He used old credentials I forgot I even had access to. Nothing bold enough to raise immediate red flags, but enough to suggest mismanagement if it ever came to light. In the eyes of someone who didn't know the full story, it would look like I had signed off on. That was the plan. He wasn't just planning a new life with Olivia. He was setting me up to take the fall if anything ever got investigated. He'd ruin me quietly, walk away clean, and leave me with a mess I didn't create. I sat there reading through the investigator's report, hands steady, heart strangely calm. No more confusion. No more wondering if I was imagining things. The betrayal was complete, personal, professional, even legal. They didn't just want to break me. They wanted to erase me. But they forgot who I was. I made copies of everything. Backups, flash drives, encrypted folders. I kept one at home, one in a locked drawer at work, and one with Caleb just in case. I didn't scream. I didn't send angry messages. I smiled at Ryan over breakfast, nodded politely at Olivia in the hallway, and played the same quiet role they thought I'd never grow out of. But behind that smile, I was sharpening every tool they handed me. They thought they had written the ending to my story. They were wrong. The moment I sent the meeting request, I knew everything was about to change. It was marked as an emergency session, confidential, board level only, no advance agenda. I kept it vague on purpose. I wanted them unprepared, off balance. The meeting was set for a Friday morning, just enough time to give everyone curiosity, but not enough time for suspicion to reach the wrong people. Ryan didn't even glance at the notice. Olivia saw the invite, but assumed it didn't concern her. They had no idea I had boardroom privileges. No clue that I could call meetings, vote on executive decisions, or present issues that could shake the company's foundation. I'd played my role so well for so long that they believed I was just another worker caught in the system. But today, I wasn't walking in as a silent observer. I was coming in as someone with the authority to flip the script. When I entered the boardroom that morning, most of the directors were already seated. These were people who had known my grandfather, people who had once held me as a child in the old office lobby. Some hadn't seen me in years. They looked surprised, curious even, but no one questioned my presence. I nodded politely, sat down, and opened my folder. Ryan walked in 10 minutes later, Olivia close behind. They both hesitated when they saw me sitting at the board table. His eyes narrowed slightly, hers flicked with confusion. But they said nothing and took their seats near the back, assuming this was just another high-level meeting where they'd quietly observe. I stood. "Thank you for joining on short notice." I began, my voice calm, steady. "I have something to bring to your attention, something that directly threatens the integrity of this company." The room fell silent. I clicked a button on the remote, and the screen behind me lit up. The first slide showed financial documents, accounts with my credentials tied to suspicious fund transfers. I watched as eyes widened and murmurs began to ripple across the table. "This misuse of company resources was done without my knowledge," I said. "The individual responsible used outdated permissions to move funds across accounts, potentially placing the company at legal risk." Ryan shifted in his seat, but still said nothing. The next slide showed screenshots of emails, those degrading messages, the plans to push me out, the personal attacks disguised as jokes. Then came the final blow, security footage. Clear, time-stamped clips from office surveillance. After-hours meetings. Intimate moments in the office hallways. Ryan and Olivia, unaware they were ever being watched. A heavy silence filled the room as the clips ended. This isn't just a breach of trust, I said. It's a breach of ethics, company policy, and the law. One of the board members finally spoke, his tone sharp and direct. Is this verified? I nodded. All evidence has been reviewed and confirmed by a third-party investigator. Copies have been submitted to our legal team for further action. Ryan stood up suddenly, trying to speak, but no words came. Olivia stared straight ahead, pale, unmoving. The chairman turned to him. You're dismissed from your position effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Just like that, it was done. He looked at me then, not with anger, but with disbelief. Like he was only now seeing me for the first time. Too late. He wasn't the only one with secrets. And I had just revealed mine. As soon as Ryan was gone, the room felt heavier. Not quieter, just heavier, like everyone knew we hadn't reached the bottom yet. Olivia sat frozen in her chair, trying to compose herself. She still looked like she had control, like she could spin the situation, maybe even recover. I could see it in her eyes. She thought if she stayed calm, she could frame herself as a victim of his actions. That maybe I'd only come for him. She had no idea I came for both. I turned back to the board and clicked to the next slide. There's more, I said simply. Several faces turned toward Olivia, now clearly uneasy. She straightened her shoulders and tried to hold the same air of confidence she always carried. But I was done playing games. I changed the slide again. This time, it wasn't numbers or emails. It was statements, written accounts from 3 former employees. Each one described the same pattern. Private meetings that turned into personal requests, promises of mentorship in exchange for loyalty, emotional pressure disguised as professional guidance. One account detailed how Olivia hinted at ruining a junior manager's career after he ended whatever they had going on. Another explained how performance reviews were manipulated to favor those who stayed close to her, and how others mysteriously lost promotions after keeping their distance. The final statement was from a woman who had worked directly under Olivia in another branch. She wrote about late-night messages, inappropriate comments, and being passed over for projects after refusing to meet outside work. Her words were sharp, clear, and brave. None of them had come forward before. They'd been afraid of retaliation, of losing jobs, of not being believed. But once I reached out, showed them what was happening now, they agreed to speak. Quietly, safely, anonymously. But their stories were real. Olivia's face stayed still, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair. One board member, a woman who had been silent through the whole meeting, finally leaned forward. You said nothing was personal, she said to Olivia. But what I'm seeing looks like a pattern. Another added, this is not just a relationship gone wrong. This is leadership failure. Repeated. Covered up. I didn't need to say much more. The evidence spoke louder than anything else. I recommend her immediate removal, I said, pending a formal HR and legal review. But in the meantime, I don't believe it's safe, for our staff or our reputation, for her to continue in this position. The chairman nodded grimly. Agreed. Security was called again. Olivia didn't protest. She stood slowly, like someone waking from a dream she thought was real. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked out, one step at a time. Later that day, as the building began to settle back into its usual rhythm, I stepped into the hallway. Ryan was there, waiting alone. His voice was low. Please just hear me out. I didn't stop walking. He reached out, desperate now. I made a mistake. I paused, looked him in the eye, and then looked away. Not a word. Not a sigh. Just silence. Because some things don't deserve answers. They deserve consequences. Filing for divorce didn't bring the closure I thought it would. It wasn't the paperwork or the signatures that made it real. It was the silence afterward. The sudden absence of someone who used to share the same space, same meals, same bed. But by then, he wasn't the man I'd married. That version of him had been gone long before I found the hotel, long before the emails, long before the boardroom. I made sure the filing was swift and clean. No drama, no drawn-out battles. I had already done the hard work, documented the lies, protected myself legally, and locked in my position. Ryan didn't have much ground left to stand on. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but there was nothing left for him to claim. He had tied his future to Olivia, and when she went down, she took every promise with her. Everything he thought he'd gained slipped away before his eyes. The job? Gone. The connections? Useless. The respect of our peers? Non-existent. People started avoiding him like a bad rumor. Clients he once name-dropped wouldn't return his calls. Friends we'd known for years suddenly became very quiet. It was like watching someone disappear in slow motion. I didn't follow the details of his downfall too closely. I didn't need to. I just let the process do what it was built to do. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was focused on freedom. There was one moment, though, that stayed with me. A reporter reached out for a statement. Then another. And another. People wanted to hear my side, to put my face in headline, to spin my silence into a viral confession. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I was afraid. I simply wasn't ready to let the world into something that was still healing inside me. Everyone expected me to rage, to expose, to scream. But the truth was, my silence was more powerful than anything I could say. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace over noise. Still, there were quiet victories I allowed myself to enjoy. One of them was an address that used to haunt me, the place where Ryan took Olivia after hours, where they shared drinks and dreams that didn't belong to them. A luxury apartment in the heart of the city. Modern. Cold. Perfect, in a way only shallow things can be. He once bragged about moving in with her there, about the future they'd build. I remember overhearing them talk about how I wouldn't survive on her own, how I'd probably end up in some tiny rental. So when the listing appeared a few months later, unclaimed, overpriced, and strangely familiar, I made the call. No bargaining. No questions. I bought it outright. The agent smiled politely and asked if I was buying it for someone else. No, I said. It's for me. Standing in that empty apartment felt like standing in a memory that had finally been rewritten. Not with pain, not with bitterness, but with clarity. It wasn't about the space. It was about reclaiming what they thought I'd lost. They took so much for granted. They thought I'd fade quietly. Instead, I bought their dream and turned it into my proof. Not for them, for me. When I stepped into the CEO's office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, it didn't destroy me. It shaped me, not into someone bitter or cold, but into someone clearer, stronger, and absolutely unwilling to stay silent ever again. I didn't waste time. The first thing I did was meet with the leadership team, not as a hidden owner, but as the face of the company. Some were surprised, a few were stunned, but most of them looked relieved. They had seen what unfolded. They had witnessed how I handled every moment with grace, never once losing control, even when I had every reason to. I listened to everyone, from department heads to interns. I wanted to hear what they needed, what they feared, what had been ignored under the previous leadership. The truth spilled out quickly. People had been scared to speak up. There were stories of unfair treatment, favoritism, and pressure disguised as ambition. I took it all in and promised that things would be different. Not with slogans or flashy statements, but with actions. We rewrote policies from the ground up, created clear channels for reporting misconduct, set up anonymous feedback systems, made it clear that no position, no title, no relationship gave anyone the right to abuse power. It wasn't about revenge. It was about never letting what happened to me, or to others, happen again under this roof. One by one, team members started opening up more. Their posture changed. Their tone changed. It wasn't just respect. They believed in me. Not because I held a title, but because they saw what I had walked through and how I walked through. That mattered more than I ever expected. I didn't run this company to prove anything to Ryan or Olivia or anyone who doubted me. I ran it because I finally saw what my grandfather meant when he said leadership wasn't about control. It was about protection, about building something that lasts not through fear, but through trust. I found myself staying late some nights, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, sitting in his old chair, looking over the city, thinking about how far we'd come. Not just me, but the company, the people, the legacy. Everything I lost gave me back something more powerful. Betrayal didn't ruin my life. It revealed the life I was always meant to claim. I walked through the office in silence, the same halls where I used to feel invisible. Every corner carried a memory, some painful, some powerful. But this time, I wasn't walking in as anyone's wife. I wasn't hiding behind a role. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was already seen, already known, because I owned it all now. The staff no longer looked through. They looked to me, not out of fear, but with respect. They had watched the fall, and they had witnessed the rise. And I had done it without screaming, without revenge. I simply stepped into what was already mine. The weight I used to carry, the doubt, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it didn't crush me. It shaped me. And now, there was nothing left to fear, nothing left to run from. I had already faced the worst and turned it into something unshakable. I stood in my office, looking out at the same city where they once thought they could build a future without me. I had been written off, cast aside, and replaced. And yet here I was, not broken, not bitter, just better. And in my heart, I wrote a message he would never read. Ryan, you didn't win. You didn't even understand what you were destroying. But thank you for setting me free. He thought he was walking away from someone small, but he was walking away from the woman who owned the floor beneath his feet. This was never about revenge. It was about return. Return to my voice, my worth, my legacy. This was never just a company. It was my family's name. And now it's my power. Alone.